here we go. Time for Cleared to Play. Going to take you inside the tent and get you updated on the latest injuries in the Bay. Proud to partner with UCSF Health on this segment and bring in Associate Professor of Orthopedic Surgery. That is Dr. Nirav Pandya. Hi, Doc.
Hey, guys. How you doing? Happy January, Dan.
Thank you, Doc. I appreciate that.
That was really well played.
It's smart, man.
Yeah.
You don't go to medical school without having a breadth of knowledge across all subjects.
Again, we could do that all the way to the 31st, right?
Yeah, you're welcome to.
Happy January.
It's a little bit awkward, but it's the sentiment that counts, Doc, and I'm feeling the love. Thank you.
Yeah. Happy New Year, Doc.
You too, Mark. Everything different for everyone, a little bit different.
We're all talking about Draymond Green. Maybe we'll get to his return to play here in a second, but let's start with Chris Paul. The surgery has already taken place. We know the timeline, I guess at least 3 or 4 weeks at least, especially though factoring his age, the other hand problems. What do you think?
Yeah, I think they released, it was a little bit unclear what bone was broken, but they said it was his metacarpal, which is, the most common bone that's broken and probably has the quickest return to play for an NBA player. Typically, what happens during the surgery, they use some combination of plates or screws or sometimes pins to basically hold the bone in place. And if you look historically at NBA players, most of them kind of get back right around 4 to 5 weeks with this type of surgery. Now, he's a little bit older. He's had multiple hand injuries, but the fact you're going to reevaluate him at 3 weeks, typically that's when you get an x-ray, you check their mobility. So that does sound like they're looking at potentially a 4 to 5 week return. And it's not his dominant hand. So, he's got that right hand for shooting and primarily passing. So I think it would not be out of the possibility that we're looking at mid-February for Chris Paul to return. Obviously if he's still on the team based on what the team does at the trade deadline.
Yeah, good point. I mean, mid-February would be after the deadline. So it'd be interesting to see if they trade him before he is able to come back, if he's played his last game as a Warrior or not. GP2 has been out for a while now with the hamstring strain. What do you think his timeline's looking like in terms of him coming back?
Yeah, I think it's kind of in the same kind of as it was with his calf. You're looking at somewhere between, 3 to 4 weeks, particularly with this soft tissue kind of stuff. He looks pretty good when you see him kind of walking around with clips of him on the court. The tough thing with him is that for a typical kind of grade 2-ish hamstring strain, you're looking at a couple weeks, but he's had the calf, he's had the core muscle stuff, he's had so many soft tissue injuries. So I think that's what would be the more determining factor. What's the risk of him coming back a little bit earlier and potentially aggravating another area? So in general, the injury does not seem too severe, but given his overall injury history and the way that he plays, where he's explosive and he stresses those soft tissues, I think they're probably going to err on the side of being a little bit more cautious with him, potentially looking at, maybe early February for a return for him.
Doc, okay, Draymond even mentioned, hey, we got to come up with a plan here and certainly go low risk as far as injury. He said he played a lot of basketball, but also said he took 10 days where he didn't even touch a basketball. Like, what should the Warriors be thinking about in building a return to play for Draymond?
Yeah, I think that the big difference for him is that because he's not coming back from an injury, the degree to which you can kind of get back into shape pretty quickly is a lot better than, say, you're out with a calf strain or a hamstring issue. So 10 days off seems like a lot for an NBA player, but for someone who's not injured, I think Draymond can get that back pretty quickly. So I would expect that for something like this, potentially 7 to 10 days from, quote unquote, the time he was able to come back and practice with the team, and then potentially a little bit of a minutes restriction. But early next week, middle part of next week would seem to be an ideal time frame, assuming that he feels good, feels confident, and can get his rhythm back.
Niners have some injury concerns, but luckily a week and a half off still before they have to play again. But Cleveland Ferrell suffered a knee injury against the Rams. Kyle Shanahan said it wasn't ACL or MCL, but a knee injury nonetheless. What did you think and what did you see from that injury?
Yeah, it was concerning. That was obviously the first concern I had was this potentially, an MCL type injury, particularly given the mechanism. But when they rule that out, typically what will cause someone to be out for a couple weeks is usually a bone bruise, or maybe even a small meniscus tear. It sounded like there wasn't much concern about it from Shanahan in the press conference, but obviously something that you want to watch a little bit more closely. I think when you get these quote unquote nebulous diagnoses where it's not a straightforward ligament injury, you worry a little bit more about how the knee is going to respond. So there may be some inflammation, there may be some bruising. So it's hard to put a timeline on it. And sometimes it's just about, okay, let's get you into practice. Let's see how you're feeling. And hopefully, given his age, it's something that turns around quickly and is available for the playoffs.
Doc Pandya with us, cleared to play, Willard and Dibs. Doc, I want to ask you about Christian McCaffrey. We go from what was considered an unserious injury, but it was an injury, to then basically 3 weeks of no football games, and then bang, in a week and a half, he's got to go play the biggest game of the year. What are the concerns there?
I think if it was earlier in the season, say like he'd played a couple games and he has to take a big chunk of games off in the middle of the season, he'd be a little bit more concerned. I think at this point now, just limiting his contact is probably the biggest thing that's going to help make sure that he's ready for the playoffs. There's so many things that he can do to stay explosive, to still stay in shape without taking that beating. So I think this is going to be a lot, beneficial for him as an explosive speed athlete to not have that pounding, stay sharp, and he'll have exactly that 2 to 3 time frame that for a muscle strain to kind of turn around. So I'm not super concerned that he's going to have to go right back in. He's had a lot of football. His timing is going to be able to stay in, kind of in line with those practices. So I think it lines up very well for him to have a great performance in the playoffs and not have this calf bother.
Doc, thanks so much. Great stuff as always.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.
There he goes. Doc Pandya with us, and the proceeding was sponsored by UCSF Health.